What is your childhood memory that you thought was normal, but realized it was traumatic later in your life? Story 2. This was tough to read because I can relate to your experience. My mom used to lock me inside the house after promising that the babysitter would show up any minute. But most days, the babysitter never came, and I was left alone in the house for 8 hours or more. It was haunting, especially because I wasn't allowed to watch TV, so the silence stretched on forever, and every little sound felt terrifying. The sad part is that when my mom did come home, she would yell at me for making a mess, and I'd be so relieved just to see her that I would apologize and offer to do extra chores. Looking back, the more I think about my childhood, the more I realize how much sadness there was that I didn't fully understand at the time. If you want to talk more about it, I'm here. I hope you're doing well now. Story 3. My father and I had a game when I was a child called Help Daddy Remember What Hospital He Went to Last. My father was mentally ill and would intentionally hurt himself to get anxiety, antipsychotic, and pain medications. There were 5 hospitals within a 2-hour drive of us, and back in the late 80s and early 90s, there weren't any computer systems like there are now to track him. He would literally break his own fingers, burn himself with oil, anything to get what he needed. It became my job to help him remember where he'd been so he wouldn't get caught. After he took his own life when I was 12, I was left with so many emotions and scary memories. It's been a long, difficult road, but I hope wherever he is now, he's no longer in pain. Story 4. From the time I was 8 until I was around 10, the school's ELS, English language support teacher, would sometimes pull me out of recess to sit down and play these weird games. I hated it because it meant I wasn't outside writing my stories, which was what I loved to do. Plus, I was a native English speaker, so it never made sense to me why I needed help from the ELS teacher. It turns out she wasn't really an ELS teacher at all. She was the school counselor. She was trying to gather enough information to show that I had signs of autism, ADD, or a learning disorder so she could present the case to the National Health Service and get me the proper psychological care. My parents, unfortunately, were refusing to send me to a psychologist at the time. Sadly, her husband passed away before she could finish, and I didn't get the help I needed until I was 17, when I could make that decision for myself. Story 7. My mother used to let me skip school often to visit my older sister in the hospital. We'd have what we called hospital campouts, where I'd sleep in my sister's hospital bed while my mom took the recliner chair provided for parents. At the time, I thought it was fun, but now I realize why she did it. Everyone, from doctors to social workers, had told her to help me make as many good memories with my sister as possible before she passed away. Surprisingly, the most traumatic part wasn't the time spent in the hospital. What stands out the most now are the nursery rhymes my mother made me memorize during those visits. She'd sing them to me, and I'd sing them back, over and over. The tune was borrowed from Hickory Dickory Dock, which I loved from watching Play School. She chose it because it was familiar but wouldn't come up in school, so there was no risk of me singing the wrong lyrics in front of others. But these weren't ordinary nursery rhymes. The first verse was about my dad, that he was abusive, and that I couldn't be placed with him. The second verse was my godmother's name and phone number, along with a note that she had the documents to prove the AB and would take me in. Looking back, I now understand that my mother was trying to prepare me for the worst. She feared my father might kill her one day, whether it looked like an accident or not. She needed me, even at the age of 4, to be able to tell the police that my dad was abusive, give them my godmother's contact information, and ensure I had a safe place to go. Memorizing that rhyme was her way of making sure I could survive if the worst happened. Story 8. My mom passed away when I was 5 from breast cancer. When we were at the service at our church, my dad, sisters, and I were walked to the front pew, and everyone was being so nice. When the pastor started talking, everyone around me started crying, especially my dad. I remember wondering why they were all crying, and when it didn't stop, I just joined in. I didn't get why we were crying and thought my mom was just at the hospital resting like she had been so many times before. Story 9. One weird example was when my older brother and I asked for Digimon starter decks for Christmas, but my mom and her boyfriend only had money for one, and it went to my brother. I got some cheap squirt guns or something instead. My mom had to leave for whatever reason, and I was pouting. Her boyfriend asked me what was wrong, and I told him I didn't get a Digimon deck. He went over to my brother and asked if that was true. My brother looked scared and said yes. All I remember is him hitting my brother all over. My brother screaming and trying to crawl away while he dragged him by his legs from the living room into the kitchen, hitting him all over. Then I remember him throwing him an ice pack. It was normal because we were beat all the time, and it only seemed fair that my brother should get beat real bad since he got the Digimon deck, but I didn't. Story 10. My best friend at the time, and I used to live in a small country town. Everybody knew everyone, and it was quiet. Not much happening around town at any time of the year. One day, my friend and I were walking up and down the street picking berries off trees when I suddenly needed to go to the bathroom. I hurried home, about 3 or 4 houses down from where we were, and went about my business. I must have gotten distracted by my Barbies on the way back because about 20 minutes later, my best friend came running back to my house, her legs covered in blood. It turned out that our neighbor, just a few houses up, had assaulted her in his backyard. She was being too loud, and he tried to silence her, but she managed to struggle her way out and crawl down the driveway. I still remember my mom and her mom calling the police, looking absolutely horrified, as if they had just witnessed something terrible. Story 11. One of my earliest memories is being woken up from my sleep so my dad could punish me with a belt for leaving a pair of shoes on the closet floor. I don't know why he checked in the middle of the night. One time, my sister and I woke up to find my mom cooking ground beef with her fingers on the stove coils without a pan. She suddenly decided to go to McDonald's instead. So being around 6 years old, I climbed in the car, excited for a happy meal. My sister, who was 9 at the time, begged me not to go, realizing something was off. We drove a few blocks, hit a sign, and then came back without any food. Looking back, I realized we could have been in serious danger that night. My sister later told me she had paced outside, hoping we would return safely. We were probably younger than I remember, but I don't know how I recall all these details. Growing up, I played with scales, not realizing what they were used for. Our family gatherings included dog fights, adult smoking, and watching inappropriate movies. They didn't really try to keep that stuff away from the kids. When I smoked for the first time as a teenager, it suddenly felt familiar, like I had experienced it before as a child. My childhood was complicated. Everything felt normal until we started going to church, and then things changed in a different way. Suddenly, Harry Potter was forbidden as witchcraft, and secular music wasn't allowed, except maybe Creed. I didn't realize how dysfunctional things were until I reached my early teens. My family continues to struggle with those issues, and my mom passed last year. But I still love her, despite all the mistakes she made raising me. I turned out okay, and I try not to let my childhood define who I am now. Thankfully, my husband and his family showed me what normal life can look like. Story 12. There were many things I knew weren't great, but 2 in particular surprised me when I found out they weren't normal. The first was having no emotional connection to my mom at all, because she seemed incapable of expressing emotions. The second was that I had to organize my life on my own, starting on my second day of school. I found therapists were quite shocked when I mentioned these 2 things, especially the second one. On the first day of school, my family showed me how to get there. By the second day, I had my own alarm clock, some money to buy breakfast at the bakery downstairs. I ate the same breakfast for 5 years. 1 piece of strawberry cake, 1 piece of cheesecake, and in winter, a seasonal apple turnover, and a key to get home. It never occurred to me that this could be unusual. I was genuinely puzzled when my little sister, born 12 years later, got woken up every day, had breakfast made for her by my mom, and was driven to school. I thought the way I grew up was normal, until I learned it was actually considered neglect. What I also find strange is when friends tell me how their kids wake them up in the morning. I can't remember ever being allowed to do that. Only on Sundays, after making coffee. It might not seem exactly traumatic, but it still feels weird to me. Story 13. I used to comfort my dad during my parents' divorce. I thought I was being so mature by being there for him and telling him it was okay to leave mom because I knew they fought. The first time I clearly remember asking when they were going to divorce was around the age of 5. My dad and I would have lengthy discussions about everything wrong with mom, and he would even ask me for permission to leave her. I used to think it was because he valued my opinion so much. Several years later, in my early teens, I realized just how wrong the entire situation was. He unloaded all his issues onto a child and asked for my permission so I would feel responsible for the divorce, and he wouldn't have to take the blame. No child should ever have to go through that. I believe it's linked to some of the social and trust issues I deal with today. Thanks, Dad. Story 14. My parents criticized almost everything, especially my appearance. My hair was too short. I looked too heavy in certain clothes because I supposedly bought the wrong size. It went on like that. My grades weren't good enough, I hung out with the wrong people, and I would never get a boyfriend if I didn't change my looks or attitude. They always told me they had to say these things because otherwise, I would never know how to be a normal adult. For the longest time, I thought they were right. Now I realize that they kept me from becoming a confident person. I always feel inferior, weak, and foolish no matter what I do. They also said they were preparing me for the tough world out there. But no one has ever insulted me as much as my parents did with their constant remarks. Story 15. This story came up during Easter dinner. It seems to have been traumatic for my sister, but it never really bothered me. I, male, was about 3, 4 years old, and my sister was around 9, 10. For some unknown reason, my sister and I would take baths together. I guess it was my mom's way of getting some time to herself. We were both old enough to remember it, so we were probably a bit too old for that. We'd stay in the bath for about an hour. My sister would be shivering cold. She jokes about how her lips would turn purple, while I would happily carve soap and make soap soup in my McDonald's trick-or-treat bucket. It never bothered me, but my sister was clearly upset when she brought it up on Sunday. Story 17. I have PKU, a genetic condition that requires a very restrictive diet. From a young age, I knew exactly what I couldn't eat, and I carried books that helped me track how much of certain foods I could have. I had to take packed lunches everywhere, even to friends' houses. The real challenges began when my parents divorced. My mom took custody of us and made sure I followed my diet, but she didn't really care enough to ensure I was eating enough to stay healthy. At its worst, I was eating a tiny bowl of cereal for breakfast, 25g, a few slices of cucumber, I couldn't have tomatoes, an apple, and a carton of apple juice for lunch. Dinner was a small plate of whatever leftovers my family had eaten the day before, but I could only have small portions of it since my diet was so restrictive. That was all I ate, almost every day for over a year. During school holidays, it was even worse because my mom had to prepare my meals herself, and she often just didn't bother. At 9 years old, I couldn't cook for myself, and most convenient snack foods were off limits. Bread and chips were out of the question, and fresh food wasn't readily available. Desperate, I sometimes ate my brother's leftovers from the trash, even if they tasted like ash from my mom's cigarettes. I was just that hungry. For years, I thought this hunger was just how people with PKU lived. My mom convinced me that many things were my fault, including her failed relationships and my dad's sickness. I thought it was just part of having this condition. A year later, I moved in with my dad's parents. They made sure I was properly fed and served me meals I could eat. They even found recipes for people with my condition. I quickly went from underweight to borderline overweight. It wasn't until I was 16, after meeting others with PKU, that I realized none of them had ever been hungry as children. That's when I understood how neglectful my mom had been. Even now, I have an unhealthy tolerance for hunger. I sometimes forget to eat for days, and people often have to remind me because I'm so used to going without food for long stretches. Story 18. I've always been afraid of my mom. I have mental health issues and have been in and out of therapy for the past 7 years. Once I mentioned to my dad how often I had babysitters growing up, and he confessed that whenever I was with a sitter, it was because my mom would go out drinking until she blacked out, while my dad worked night shifts. When she came home, she would mentally and physically ab me. But my babysitter created a closet game where I would hide in the closet until my dad returned to calm my mom down. Eventually, my sitter called CPS and my mom went into AA. She's doing better now but refuses to fully give up alcohol and still mentally abs me. It's tough, but every time I see that babysitter, now in college, I give her the biggest hug because without her, I don't think I'd be here today. For context, my mom has bipolar disorder and often blamed her actions on that. Even though I don't like her, I have no choice but to stay since I'm only 16. Thankfully, with therapy and some tough stays in the hospital, I'm doing better now. I've been clean from self-harm for about 1.5 years. Story 19. For years, my older disabled brother referred to me exclusively as it or the whale, and would constantly tell me that no one liked me, that I was ugly, and that I had no friends. He did this both in public and in private, and my dad thought it was hilarious. He actually encouraged my brother's behavior by laughing or yelling at me whenever I tried to defend myself. I'll never forget the smug look on my brother's face when my dad said, "Oh, get over it. He doesn't know any better." To be clear, my brother is physically disabled, not mentally. At the same time, my father constantly reminded me that my older brother was special and needed to be protected. Since my brother couldn't fight his own battles, I was expected to stand up for him. And I did. By the time I left elementary school, I had over 20 detentions, many of which resulted from fighting people who made rude comments about my brother or my family. When I was a freshman and my brother was a senior, we saw each other in the halls several times a day. He got into the habit of following me around, shouting insults at me, and encouraging others to join in. And for a long time, a lot of kids did. I guess they found something funny about a disabled kid verbally bullying his younger sister, while that same younger sister was getting into fights with people for defending him. At one point, I started self-harming. When my brother publicly mocked me for that, I switched to a form that was easier to explain away as scrapes. It wasn't until a classmate, who I had once served detention with after punching him for making fun of my brother, stood up for me that I realized how messed up the whole situation was. Story 21. I used to wait at a nearby church in a wooded area after school for my dad to pick me up, but he was often late. One day, he was exceptionally late, and I was sitting there all alone when a gray van pulled up about 30 feet away behind me. I was sitting on a rock next to the road. After about 4 minutes of them not moving, an unpleasant-looking man and woman got out and walked over to me, talking about how they had found faith and wanted me to come with them. They told me they had food in their car and asked me to get in so we could talk more. At 13 years old, I knew better than to talk to strangers, so I stood on the asphalt of the road, making sure any passing cars could see me. The only reason they left was because they noticed a car coming slowly toward us, which, thankfully, was my dad's. When my dad saw the people speed off in the opposite direction, he thought it was suspicious. I told him everything that had happened, and we immediately called the police. My dad even followed the van to get their license plate number. The van drove creepily slow through neighborhood roads, about 10 miles per hour. Eventually, 8 police cruisers arrived, and they arrested the people in the van. At the time, I wasn't told their names or what they had done, but I recently learned from my dad that they were wanted criminals, likely involved in kidnapping. It was chilling to realize what could have happened if my dad hadn't shown up when he did. Story 22. During the summer in high school, when I had to attend summer school, my parents made it clear that I was responsible for getting myself to and from school. My parents had divorced years earlier, and of course lived separately. My dad lived down the street, but my mom lived 3.5 miles away, so I had to walk or bike the distance early each morning. Now, my mom wasn't unkind, but despite my dad living closer, he insisted that I make birdhouses every day after school that entire summer. At the time, I thought this was normal, but later I realized it wasn't entirely typical. There were other memories with my dad that were definitely more difficult. One instance, after a day in high school, my dad had me kneel in the living room while he questioned me about something I had said to a friend regarding my sister. He slapped me several times, and I almost passed out. My sister was sitting on the couch, witnessing everything. There were other situations where I felt humiliated in front of my sister, but the hardest part was when I told my dad I was feeling really low. And instead of comfort, he handed me a kitchen knife and explained how to hurt myself. He just sat there and waited. There was also a conversation in high school where he acknowledged that I was more sensitive than other boys and promised to treat me with more patience. However, years later, nothing really changed. When I confronted him about treating me differently from my sister, he simply said it was because we were different genders, and of course he would treat us differently. Story 24. My father always was a peculiar man, but he never did anything in front of me that I would consider abusive. He was kind of nerdy, pretty calm, living in his own bubble. I was the firstborn and got a younger sister when I was 9 and brother when I was 10. My mom left him in 2002 when I was 12 after falling in love again with her first love, my now stepfather. After that, he lived on his own in a small 2-bedroom flat, and we would go see him every couple weekends. I had my own room, and my little brother and sister would sleep in his room on little beds. In 2004, we moved in City B while he remained in City A, but we kept going there every couple weekends. My father then started writing books. I discovered later on that they all were weird erotic books, but I didn't think much of it. My father had always been pretty sexually open, and so was my mother, and it was something I knew. Being a young teenager, I definitely didn't want to know anything specific about that. In 2013, he was diagnosed with leukemia. About at the same time, my sister, who was then 13, started opening up to me. A bit earlier that year, she had admitted to the family that she had been dating a 21-year-old freak in secret for the past 2 years. So, starting when she was 11. We later discovered that he or her and Abba her. My father was absolutely fine with her dating that man and even welcomed him to his home a few times. My sister also told me, and I knew it from my mother, that she had been suffering from very weird daily hallucinations that she couldn't describe. She also had no memories of her childhood and suffered from aphasia, the inability to visualize things in your mind. She suspected my father of having done something to her when she was younger. I had the same suspicion. In 2014, my father died. His younger sister came to his deathbed. After he passed, we went to have a drink. Him and her always had a pretty conflicted relationship. I then asked her the question that I was obsessed with. Do you think my dad did something to my sister? She looked me dead in the eyes, started tearing up and said, yes. She then explained to me that when she was a child, he surely abbed her a few times and apparently did some creepy things to his mother as well. She also told me he sent to many members of the family creepy books we wrote with a lot of hardcore SS stuff, including underage S. He, for example, wrote a Harry Potter fan fiction in which Hermione is gang raped by Death Eaters. After his death, I helped clean his stuff. He had a lot of books. While in the middle of putting them in boxed, I found one he wrote. I looked at the back and what I read terrified me. It was a kind of mix between fiction and an autobiography. It was about him and his family, but the names and the setting were slightly altered. It was about a father of 3 children living alone after a breakup. In the book, his young daughter comes back to live with him, and they both fall in love with each other. Never read it, I was too disgusted. My girlfriend at the time read it and confirmed that this was indeed what the book was about and said it was pretty disgusting indeed. I will never know for sure what happened, but it is very troubling. I think I never mourned my father, never felt bad about his death. Story 25. Not really much of a childhood memory, but more of a memory from my teen years. I used to think it was normal for a guy I was seeing in high school to sneak in every other week and have S with me. Looking back on it, most of the times he came over, it was uninvited, and he would just show up without telling me. A few times he pressured me into doing things I was not comfortable doing, but I just thought this is what happens when you are a teen. Eventually, my last year of high school before I dropped out, he took it as far as to convincing me to have S at school in a hidden away spot, which probably wasn't very hidden now thinking about it. It got old fast because he would ask constantly, and if I didn't, he would threaten to tell everyone in school about what's been happening. He was popular, so it would spread fast, and it made me realize that I should not let him take advantage of me anymore like that. One day, he messaged me and asks again. I was fed up with his begging and threatening that I told him to meet me at the hidden spot. At first, I was okay with it, but the month before, I was dealing with bad depression and I attempted suicide. I was done with his mind games and lying constantly. At first, I was going to do it, but I decided that I just wanted to talk to him about not seeing each other anymore. He didn't like that, and he forced me to have S with him. I didn't know what to do at the time because I thought it was okay, but I was crying and I told him, no. It's been 3 years since I dropped out and no one in my family knows he is the reason I was depressed, which led me to dropping out. It traumatized me. I didn't really know if I could trust a guy after that. I am married now, and I still don't fully know if I can. TLDR, I was raped in high school by a guy I was hooking up with, leaving me with trust issues and depression on a higher scale. Story 26. My parents and I were at a party once. I was about 12, and there was another girl there who rode in the same carpool with me. Her father got wasted and backhanded her across the face so hard she went flying into a wall, in front of everyone, and no one said or did a goddamn thing. So when I got to school on Monday, I told my guidance counselor about it. Then I immediately told my parents, expecting that they would be proud of me. Instead, they completely freaked out and told me that was none of our business and that the school had tricked me into thinking that I had to tell someone about it. I remember being even more confused at this point because the previous year, the boy who sat next to me in class told me about his uncle molesting him, and I told a teacher about it. My parents could not stop telling me how proud they were and that I had done the right thing. When I asked why it was wrong this time, they explained that even though her dad shouldn't have hit her, she was kind of obnoxious and he was drunk, so we shouldn't risk making things weird with their friends by getting them in trouble. After this incident, they would make fun of the little girl behind her back, tell me not to act like her, and how lucky I was that we weren't screwed up like that family. I realize now that it was meant to threaten me, but not in a way that I could tell other people about, since I'd obviously proven I would whistleblow. Nothing ever happened. No adult or authority figure looked into it what I told the school. So eventually I just started to believe I was in the wrong. Then I grew up and now I'm a little sick to my stomach. that over 50 adults watched a little girl get beaten up and just sip their drinks awkwardly. Story 27. My mom is a hoarder, exactly what you'd imagine from TV. The house, appliances, and plumbing were always in disrepair. Not because we couldn't afford the repairs, but my mom was just too embarrassed to have someone come fix things. The house was always filled with useless junk, old clothes, mail, you name it. I was never allowed to have friends over and hardly allowed to leave the house, which had a negative impact on my social development at a young age. I always had a feeling it wasn't normal, but my mom always scolded me whenever I questioned her lifestyle since she's always been in denial that she has a problem. I just wound up accepting that's how some people are. Now that I'm an adult living on my own with a functional life, I'm a bit of a neat freak, and I hate seeing the way my mom still lives. She's actually a really loving mother who would do anything for anyone, except seek out mental health help for herself. Story 28. Not really traumatic, but every year for Christmas, I got a bunch of inexpensive presents that were wrapped and left under the tree ahead of Christmas that were tagged as being from my parents, and a few moderately expensive unwrapped presents that were from Santa on Christmas morning. One Christmas all I asked for was a crisscross crash, and that Christmas morning Santa left one. But my parents insisted it was for my nephew, who was 2 years younger than me and staying with us because my brother-in-law kicked out my sister. I found out as an adult it was bought for me, but because my little nephew didn't get as much and was sad over the domestic problems, they gave it to him. After that, I started getting a new class of present on Christmas. It was always wrapped and brought over on Christmas Eve, and it was from my big brother, who was in his late teens/early 20s. It was also always something much more expensive than even my best Santa present, an Atari 2600 one year, a TI 994A another, a laboratory-quality microscope, a fancy model train set. Turns out my parents were kind of miserly, and my brother felt they should spend more on Christmas presents for me. To be fair, my dad had been a school teacher most of his life and had 4 kids. When I was born, they were all in their teens or about to be teens and soon moved out, and my dad switched careers to being a truck driver. He was a union driver and made the equivalent of $75K a year, but they still Christmas shopped like he was an underpaid school teacher with 4 kids. So every year, my nice present from Santa was actually from my big brother. He was angry they gave it to my nephew that year, so he started delivering them on Christmas Eve and saying they were from him. Story 29. Not sure if this counts because it's more of the aftermath of Abby, and I'm not sure if I've told it before, but anyway, as a younger child, I used to be extremely kind-hearted and shy. After my parents' divorce, my dad got with this relatively intelligent, IKEA food-type quality of a woman with the children of her own. I'm not going to go into the details of all the crap they put myself and my siblings through, but just think getting us grounded for smiling, being locked up for having an asthma attack and being too noisy and constant belittling. They'd push and bite and shit down our throats, but my siblings and I were always trying to be the better people. I just thought it was sibling rivalry. And Dad's girlfriend at the time was just being protective. I thought that's what all step-parents were like, as this was my only experience with a step-parent. It took quite a few years to realize all this had affected me on quite a high level. This chick's son was an absolute dick. Scrawny little Ranga who thought the world owes him everything, including the flying fox I was playing on with my siblings. He didn't want to join, which would have been fine, but to have the whole thing to himself. So what did I do? I agreed on the condition that I could push him along the way for a boost. I'm not incredibly smart, but I'm not dumb. I knew that if I pushed him to the end bar with enough force, he would go flying and either land face down or on his back. So that's what I did, and I broke his arm. I realized that I was disappointed with the result and saw it as dismal, and though I wasn't scared or ashamed, put on a good set of crocodile tears to get myself out of any trouble. That was the night I realized I had come to not give a shit about not just them, but most people anymore. I did stupid like pushing people off flying foxes to see how it would hurt them because I wanted to. I was a manipulative, apathetic bee who had fallen into a terrible fing depression because I wasn't willing to stand up for myself in the beginning. Dad's then girlfriend is his wife. She has 3 kids now. Story 30. So I must have been around 6 or 7. To this day, I'm not too sure if it actually happened or not, but I have a vivid memory of my brother molesting so strong that if I think about it, sometimes my body will start reliving the sensation of what he did. I remember that he was watching me at home because our mom and sister had gone out for some reason I don't remember. But it was daytime, so they must have been out shopping, but my brother was stuck babysitting me. Whenever my siblings had to babysit me back then, they would just put a tape on the TV. In this case, it was Sleeping Beauty. My brother, meanwhile, was doing his HS homework, and I was getting bored. But I wasn't allowed to leave his sight and do what I wanted either. There was a scene where Maleficent was throwing magic at the prince or something. So my little child brain tried to imitate that by casting a spell on my brother to get him to pay attention to me. I yelled out, "I cast a spell on you," over and over again at him because I didn't even care if I annoyed him or not. A few minutes of that got me bored quickly too, and I was about to stop. And the next thing I knew, he threw his pen down in frustration and started to grind against my groin. In my head, I couldn't really process what was going on, but he was giving me attention and finally did something, so I thought the magic worked. And stupid little kid that I was goaded him again to do it again when he stopped. I do remember thinking that even if my body felt good, I had the impression that it wasn't supposed to be good, but because my brother was usually dismissive of me anyway, and there was nothing else I felt like I could have done, I felt like I had no choice but to accept it as a good thing. I don't really remember what happened after that, but he never really did anything so physically extreme after that, beyond general, very sually suggestive comments over the years. And I suffered through AB in all other ways by both him and the rest of my family. So even as I'm typing this, I'm still wondering about the validity of my memory. But it's one that stuck with me for years and made me sick to my stomach every time I end up thinking about it. It was a struggle to type most of this out, and I had to stop a couple of times to keep my composure side that I could get this off my chest. I have a bunch of issues stemming from my various trauma from my childhood, but this particular one I haven't really been able to reconcile with, but it might have caused my aversion to having S later on in my life. Story 31. For the most part, I had a normal childhood. My parents were happily married. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for about 7 years after she had my sisters. I was almost exactly 2 years older. We lived in the suburbs in a nice biggish house. Everything was good and regular. My dad worked a lot for an international tech company and missed out on some things, sports games, etc. Occasionally because of work or had to go on trips, but he spent all his free time with us. We'd throw big parties where all of our friends and their kids would come over and the adults would drink and socialize while all of us played or whatever. For 4th of July, we'd throw a big party with a blow-up water slide and everything. When I got to middle school, life completely changed. My dad got laid off from his company, so they could outsource his job. I later learned his business trips were because they made him fire his friends and hire people in China and India. Just a month or two later, my grandfather, Dad's dad, died, and they were really close. The next 4-5 years were completely different. My dad fell into alcoholism hard. He always had a problem with alcohol. He used it to cope, but until then, he'd always been functional. My parents managed to hide it for a while, but eventually it got so bad they couldn't. My dad would drink a fifth of vodka and pass out on the living room floor for days. We had no one over. My mom and him were toxic, and my sisters were hateful towards him too. I felt like he had no one besides me and family 8+ hours away. He would be forced to go live other places or rehab and would get better, then relapse, etc., etc. I was the only person he could turn to. I would have long talks with him in the basement where he lived now. I was young and barely spoke because I was so emotional and couldn't open up. He would just talk to me about how shy he felt and how much he wanted to change. When I was in 8th grade, he told me he wanted to kill himself. I carried that with me. I was mortified for years. I would go home. I was always the first home, to find him dead already. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to betray his trust. Sometimes I understood my sisters and mom, though, as he drove me and my friend drunk twice. I was 12 and didn't know what to do other than get in the car. I still am ashamed I let my friend in the car twice. More years passed, and he could never hold down a job and went to some more rehab. For a long span of time, he lived at a sober living house about 40 minutes away, but he would come home every day when he wasn't working. He was the perfect dad, except for his drinking. He listened, he was supportive, he gave me freedom, and honestly and genuinely loved me. When I was in high school, things generally got better, but he still wasn't clean yet. He ended up getting a DUI in my car at the end of my sophomore year. I had some friends that saw him get cuffed on their way home from school. He went to jail for 32 days instead of paying fines. When he was back, I had just started my junior year, and he got to see me start in my first game of varsity soccer, which made me extremely proud. One time I came home with my sisters, and we saw the delivery man for a liquor store walk out of our garage. I knew what was happening, so I told them to stay in the car and I sprinted inside. I found my dad desperately trying to drink before I could take it away from him. My dad was addicted physically, we have that gene, and mentally, so he would want it like a heroin addict would need it. He would go through withdrawal and everything. We fought physically over the alcohol, and it ended up being poured all over myself and him. He and I laid in his room for an hour until my mom got home. The entire time he was crying and begging for me to not leave him and not to hate him. He was like a child, and it was hard to see someone I idolized for so many years when I was young like this. That was the last time he drank, and he's been over 2 years clean now. Not everything is great, but he and my mom are much better now, and my sisters and him get along for the most part too. We're not as social as we used to be, but we're actually functional again. He has 2 jobs and is actually a little local politician fighting against oil interests in the little suburban town we live in. After he got better, it made me realize how fed up I was. I had focused so much on him, and I thought everything would be better once he was staying sober. I didn't realize how horribly depressed I was since middle school and how I had learned to not talk to anyone about my problems because I had been hiding my dad's alcoholism from everyone outside the family. Since everything was happening at a youngish age, I just learned to shut down and feel no emotions. I still do that, where I just don't feel anything anymore whenever I'm stressed or in a major depressive state. My senior year of high school was a rough one. I was horribly depressed but managed to do great in school and soccer, so no one thought I wasn't okay. After a big breakup of a long relationship, I felt so alone and started drinking and smoking to cope. Around Thanksgiving that year, I planned my suic. I picked the knife I was going to use but got scared schless and didn't do it. I didn't sleep that night and went back to school the next morning. Several months later, I opened up and got on antidepressants and got into a healthy relationship and got a lot better. I struggle every day with it, but I try to be better every day. My parents still don't know I actually planned my suicide. I'm almost done with my first year of college. I love my family, but I left to go to school 10 hours away. I lived in that house for 18 years, and I wanted to be further away than just 30 minutes at the nearby university. I actually ended up at my dad's alma mater and pledged to his old fraternity. Not entirely because of him. I follow in a lot of his footsteps with my life, and am almost a spitting image of him, except blonde with green eyes. Sometimes I'm scared I will fall into the hole he fell into, but I'm determined to not let myself ever get there. I don't know how to finish this, but I'm really proud of him. I love my dad so much, and I'm really close with him. He understands me, and I understand him. We don't have the relationship where we tell each other we love each other or anything, but it's known and felt. I hope he knows how proud of him I am. Story 32. In order to prepare me for a very serious health battle, several surgeries as a child, my parents took me to see a therapist. She was very friendly, very, very friendly. She would sit me on her lap and ask me to tell her nice things, like how beautiful she was or how young she looked. I distinctly remember her pulling my hand to brush through her hair. I was very young, like 7 and 8, and I block out much of those years anyway, but I don't remember it ever progressing to her touching me solely or anything like that. She apparently got caught by someone else's parents because my parents don't acknowledge that anything untoward ever happened. At the time, I thought she was just being friendly, albeit a little pushy. It didn't take long for me to realize how traumatic it was. As a teenager, I was very uncomfortable being in rooms alone with women. I still have trouble with female medical providers unless someone is in the room with me. To be put in a situation as a child where you're supposed to trust someone completely and have them take advantage of you like that is really hurtful. Story 33. When I was about 6, I finally got to go to my cousin's house. They literally lived a 10-minute walk from my grandparents' house, which we all were at every weekend. But for some reason, they never ever let me come over. Their parents weren't there at first, so I played with my female cousin in her room. Then her dad came home and sort of lurked in the doorway. She didn't have a door to her room, despite being the only girl with 2 older brothers, and they were all teenagers at this point. Just those beads that hung from the top of the frame. When she saw him, she got very quiet. One of her brothers distracted their dad, and she made us leave and run all the way to my grandparents' house. I was never allowed over again. For some reason, that memory stuck with me, but I didn't know why until I was grown when my mom told me that my cousin's dad had raped her from the age of 6 onward. No one knew about it until my cousin graduated high school, and he ended up going to prison for a bit. Story 34. When I was younger, I was told by my mom that if I ever went to an airport or a dock without her, I need to find a worker, security guard, police officer, and tell them I need help. My mom isn't here. The people with me aren't my parents. I want to go home. Being young and dumb, I was like, why would I be in an airport away from my mom? But never questioned it. I thought it was typical stranger danger stuff. Years later, I found out that my mom had reason to believe my deadbeat biological father was planning on taking me out of the UK to spite her. He tried easing her into trusting him by asking me to stay at his overnight, asking if it was okay to take me on a British seaside holiday with other relatives, and most notably, asking for my passport. She knows the tricks he pulls, so was religiously teaching me this out of fear he would do something sneaky. Another thing, she gave me an old mobile phone and taught me to use it. She always made sure I had it, and most of my friends were jealous. I had my own phone so young. It was another way to make sure I could contact her if something didn't add up. I remember she blew her top when I told her he took my phone off me to put it somewhere safe, and that I could have it back when it was time for me to go home. Story 35. I'm a childhood rape survivor. He started out slow, doing things like having me take my pants off and he would give my toys back to me. By the time I was 8, he was fully penetrating and breaking into my room at night. My grandmother caught him raping me and she pulled us apart, beat me with a wooden broom handle and told me I wasn't to tell anyone what happened. I think that is when I first started to realize that this wasn't normal. It continued, and it got so bad that he started killing my pets, made me watch him F the family dog, held guns to my head, tortured me and made me dig my own grave, which he had actually buried my 2 kittens in that spot and wanted me to find their little bodies. I was so terrified of him and my grandmother. He had threatened to kill my little brother if I said anything. He constantly asked me if I knew what my mom's female parts looked like and wanted me to describe them. I finally spoke up when I was in 7th grade. My parents cried when I told them, and my dad got red in the face and grabbed his gun. I begged him not to do anything, and that I need him to be with me because I was scared. He put the gun down and hugged me and just cried, and even then, I was still just numb to it all. I went through high school, some college, and then when I was about 22, it crushed me. Years of not thinking about it, not dealing with it, finally caught up to me. My whole life was a this is fine moment. I still have horrible self-esteem, and I have some major anxiety issues, but I think I am doing pretty well, all things considered. Then again, I could be telling myself, this is fine, because that is how I cope with it. Story 36. My mom would have my sister and I wait in the car while she went to the food bank. Essentially, she parked in a residential area in some cul-de-sac neighborhood. She would go through their 6-foot high privacy fence into the backyard, then come back with a laundry basket full of whatnot. It would always include a loaf of bread, but I never really saw the rest, and she took quite some time for a food bank. Also, having the older sibling get everything and the moon everything brand new and gilded, while I got old ragged clothes found in Grandma's house when she died and had to wear them for years straight, she got brand spanking new books. I eventually got books, but they were used and had large sections missing, and most of them were family circus. I had to wait 2+ years for new glasses even when I really needed them, because insurance would not cover them. My older sister never had such a restriction. She got a big room full of her own stuff. I got a small room that was very poorly insulated, that was full of other people's stuff. Story 37. This is weirdly pertinent to a very strange experience I had last night. I had this memory from when I was around 5 years old of my baby sister, probably like 2 getting up on the arm of our couch and pretending to surf dance and singing a song about surfing. I distinctly remember being pretty shook by this because it would have been impossible. She wasn't speaking or walking at the time, slow development. For the first time in probably a decade, in my 20s, I remembered this event, but something had changed. My sister wasn't the one doing the surfing and singing. She was sitting on the couch, and a little jester-looking fairy dude was the one. This seems trivial and silly, and I don't think I actually believe that thing was ever there in a real sense. But remembering the event in this way has me really emotional. I cried for a while last night, and I don't really know why, same as I'm writing this post. There is something about that memory that hit on something deep down. Story 38. My mother always likes to tell this story. It always gets great laughs, where she left me to watch over my little brother so she could go and pick up my grades at school on a parent and teacher meeting. My name is not uncommon, but that was the only time I had someone else in my classroom with the same name as me. While I had been always a good kid and student, they weren't, and my mother tells that when she showed up to get my grades and said my name, the teacher started to go on and on about how I had just ran there and tried to get my grades before her. Because I got terrible grades, how I was always disturbing class, and had even started dating another guy from class. I was about 12 at that time. My mother then, fuming, remembered she had one picture of me in her purse. She showed the teacher and told her, "Tell me if this is the classicness he were talking about, because if it is, she's going to get beaten very good today." The teacher realized she had been talking about the wrong student, and all was clear. What bugs me is that my mother says that if she didn't have my picture to show, she would have beaten me either way, no matter what I said. This made me realize later that my mother never truly believed me and was always ready to believe whatever was said about me without a question, no matter how much of a good and well-behaved kid I was my whole life. Now I catch myself wondering about it in therapy all the time. If she did hate me that much, since my siblings weren't raised like this while I was. Story 39. I have a huge age gap with my cousins. When I was around 10 years old, they were all mostly married and started having kids. I loved my first niece and always came over to play with her because she was so cute. I remember my cousin's husband always saying how pretty I was, which made me feel so proud. I remember telling my nanny proudly that he even said he wished I was his girlfriend. I valued being pretty a lot when I was young. Nothing more than that happened, and remembering it years later, I realized that was a fed-up thing to tell a child. I also learned later that he was a deadbeat. My aunt and uncle hated him, and he would hurt my cousin. They left him when my niece turned 4, and they moved to Europe. My niece is now in college and recently came back to visit and wanted to meet with her dad, I guess to have closure or just curious how he was doing. It was a short meeting, and he asked her for money. Story 40. There was a boy I rode the bus with that I had a massive crush on for years, basically all of middle school. He was a year older than me, so we only interacted really while riding on the bus together. This crush eventually went away due to a ton of middle high school bullshit drama, but eventually me and him were friends again. One day, when I was 14 and he was 15, he asked me to go play laser tag with him that Friday night. No indication of it being a date. I agreed to go, and his mom, little brother, and brother's friend all come too. I didn't even realize it was a date until he kissed me in the middle of a round of laser tag, and even then, I thought he just kissed me to distract me in the game and beat me. It wasn't until we were making out in the car that I realized. He asked me to come back to his house to hang out after, and I thought nothing of it. We had a snowball fight with his brother, and I was soaked by the snow. This led to me needing a change of clothes, so he brought me up to his room to grab some. He then started making out with me, took my shirt off, and tried taking my pants off. I told him no, I wasn't ready, which just pissed him off. He guilted me for making him so horny and insisted I had to do something to get him off, so I just let him take advantage of me. I won't go into details, but it ended with him coming on me and my sweater, so I had to borrow his sweatshirt to go home. I remember crying so much when I was in bed later that night from pain, but I just laughed off what had happened. For the rest of high school, he would make jokes about it, and I just laughed it off. It wasn't until about a few months ago I realized how actually traumatic that was when my current boyfriend tried to do the same in bed, and I broke down crying. Ironically, a bunch of girls from our high school have been coming out and admitting he surely assaulted them too. I thought it was completely normal to have been through that, and everyone's first date Sewell act went like that. Story 41. My 5th grade teacher turned massaging her feet into a reward and somehow had most of the kids in her class vying for her attention and the privilege of rubbing her feet. I was always anxious around her and didn't want to have any kind of interaction with her. Same went for another kid in the class, I think. And for years, I thought there was something wrong with me for not participating like the other kids. The same teacher once put music on for the class, told everybody to get up and dance. I did and still do feel incredibly uncomfortable and unnatural dancing, and so tried to hide at the back of the room not doing anything. But she spotted me and threatened to send me to the principal's office if I didn't dance. I still refused to dance and was too scared to take myself to the principal, so she literally dragged me by the hand halfway to his office before stopping to offer me the chance to apologize and return to class, which I took. Same year with the same teacher, one day my mom packed me a lollipop as a special treat for whatever reason I can't recall, and this teacher took it from me and said I didn't deserve it. I felt like she had no right to take a reward my mom gave me, but didn't want to complain to anybody from fear I'd get in trouble for having done something wrong to warrant having it taken in the first place. I didn't realize that any of this kind of etche she was doing was wrong until years later, and thought I was a bad person and a failure, all because I didn't comply with her disgusting demands. Story 42. Me and my cousin, both 13, would always hang out with this guy who lived with us for years, 23, and he would tell us how cute he thought little boys were. He would tell us conversations and Sewell experiences he had with people when he was younger. We were never fazed by it, and every time my cousin came over, we would hang out with him most of the time. We didn't really like him that much, but we were drawn to the crazy stories he would tell us. Probably because they were really fed up, but we didn't really know any better. We never knew what a pedophile was either, so we didn't think we should tell anyone. Long story short, I actually ended up getting ABD by him for years, well into my late teens. It always happened when I was asleep, and I mostly ignored it. It took a really long time for me to accept that it actually did happen to me, and it was a really bad thing. When I met my wife, I told her all these stories from my childhood about him, and she was mortified that my parents could have been so negligent to let my younger cousin and I hang out with someone so messed up. He is in jail for what he did now. He ended up creating child porn and spreading it across the internet with all he other pedo friends. It's still strange to think about now. Basically, everything from my childhood feels like someone else's memories. But I have a good wife, and my life is much better now. Story 43. My brother was a tyrant. Never let me express myself or enjoy things. If he was around and I was enjoying it, he found a way to make sure I no longer enjoyed it. He hated the family. Always got in fights with my parents. I learned it was better to just exist than try to be myself. My parents didn't give me guidance in life because they were too busy dealing with my older brother, the tyrant, that they were just happy I was not him. So by the time he left home, they were exhausted. My brother continued his SH towards me through college. I became timid and didn't know how to have proper relationships with people because getting close to people meant hurt. So I was an anxious person who, over the course of dealing with my brother, developed in mild and long-term depression and would often wake up for long periods of time for 5+ times a night. When I lived at home with him, it was partly because I thought he was going to try and hurt me in my sleep. I'm in my late 30s and he still tries his best to keep me down. I stopped talking to him in January, not this year. There were previous times when I wanted to talk to him, when he was in college and I in middle school, where he just flat out ignored me. I was a burden and not a brother to him. My mom doesn't understand, despite me telling her over and over again what it was like. Just started counseling and it has been beneficial. Story 44. When I was about 5 or so, I had this babysitter that was really nice and fun to hang out with. We had great times playing with toys and watching movies and stuff while my mom worked. She was about 15, 16 at the time. One day we were hanging out and she said she wanted to try a new game or something along those lines. I'm not going to get into the details because I don't really feel like doing that today, but she started molesting me. It started out slow, but progressed to full-on S after about a week. Went on for a few more months until I started school. I thought it was something normal until I was about 7, 8. Then I realized it was a bit weird, and not everyone had that experience. I just started to repress it, never told a soul until recently. I'm 20 now, and it started bothering me a lot more lately. Can't keep things like that repressed forever, I guess. My parents still have no idea. I feel weak and like I shouldn't feel bad about it because it was so many years ago. And I'm terrified to tell anyone other than my one closest friend because I'm afraid they'll think I'm weak or not a man or won't believe me because I'm a guy who was molested by a woman or some sh like that. Story 45. When I was a kid, I lived next to my grandma and grandpa, and they had kids living with them, and I played with the kids and got along with them. And sometimes they would tell me stories and ask me to keep the stories secret. I did. But the stories were weird. I didn't really understand them. Also, the kids would do weird things occasionally. I clearly remember this one boy who came to live with my grandma. He would just stare at food. He didn't want to touch it. He flinched a lot too. Especially when he did work up the nerve to eat, he'd be the first one done always without fail. Took him years to break this habit. My grandparents eventually adopted him, so I still know him. Sometimes people would come to check on the kids. They were called caseworkers. One of these occasions are burned into my memory. The person had come the day before and the kid was really upset that day and cried all night. Then the person came back in the morning with more people, and in the end, they dragging this kid out of my grandma's house and into their car. Well, my grandma cried, and my grandpa was very upset. The whole time he was screaming, "I don't want to go. I like it here. I don't care that she moved state. I just want to stay." I began to understand the strange stories and behaviors as I got older. My grandparents were foster parents and the kids were their foster kids. I'm not saying I was traumatized from knowing them, but knowing them definitely affected me. Made me appreciate my family. I was a lot more aware of people around me as I got older than I think other kids my age were. Caught onto things faster. Have a very strong sense of what's right and wrong. I hear horror stories about foster parents. My grandparents were nothing like those stories. They're strict, but there was never a lock on the fridge. Me and the kids could always get a snack whenever we wanted. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner was always a big table talking and eating. All the kids got Christmas presents. All the kids got new clothes at the beginning of each school term. They always had a place at the Thanksgiving dinner table and all family events. They had allowances as long as they do their chores. They always had the kids for a long time. The few kids that did leave, left because of something in the system or a family member of theirs had gotten custody. Sometimes this was a happy thing, but usually not. My grandpa died last year. 48 former foster kids showed up for his funeral. I don't really know they had been fostering for so long. Some of the kids I had never met because they had been fostered before I was even born. Others I grew up with and others I had known for a few years while they lived with my grandparents. Story 46. When I was 5 years old, it was always my mom and I, until she met my stepdad. My life changed complete. By 6, they were married and I completely lost my mom. They were in the honeymoon stage and I was in the way. I remember when my first sibling was born. Vividly, there was a moment of them sitting on the couch holding her, and he made me sit on the floor. I remember just looking up at them, wishing I was part of them. I was never jealous of my siblings. I just wanted to be included in the family and feel loved. My sisters were the best thing that happened to me, BC. I was never alone again. My stepdad would beat my ass, and I would be hit at least once a day. Yelled at and pushed away constantly. I'd just cry and feel alone. I remember now having the same nightmares almost every single night, where my mom would play with me at the park and push me on the swings, and then when I turned around, she'd always be gone. I'm going to therapy and getting help, but I guess I never realized that I had all this anger towards my mom for not stopping him. We talked about it once and it just turned into a big thing and I was heartbroken, and I broke her heart too. BC, she always did love me, and she worked hard to provide for us. She said she always defended me, and that's why her and my stepdad fought so much. I don't remember her standing up for me, except for once when I was 16, and he had beaten me up pretty badly, BC. He found out I was G. My mom threatened to leave him. Not much came out of it, but I do hope maybe I'm just suppressing feelings and memories, and she fought for me all along. Story 47. When I was in 3rd grade, I got off the bus, and my Nama, grandmother, was sitting at the corner where we got off, which wasn't abnormal as she would come stay with us if my brother had soccer. She said we were going on a fun trip. My siblings and I all got in her car eagerly, ready for our surprise trip. We all went to the movies and got ice cream, then slept at my Nama's house. I just learned recently that Nama was at our stop to prevent us from walking around the corner and seeing an ambulance in our driveway and our oldest brother, 17, being brought out on a stretcher after committing suicide. We sept at Nama's so they could clean up his brains from the wall. It was just my older brother, sister, and myself at the time. The oldest was 11. Our parents told us our brother had gone to heaven because he didn't like it here. We all were upset, asking many questions and getting no answers, but I didn't really grasp the situation until I was about 12. I didn't notice at the time that Nama's trip and my brother's passing were correlated, but looking back, I'm not sure how she kept it all together, knowing our brother had just died.